The night was thick with silence when my tires crunched onto the gravel drive earlier than anyone expected. I had been gone for weeks, traveling across state lines for work, leaving behind my home and my Pridea custom-built RV that sat like a sentinel in my yard. I had taken every precaution, locking it with reinforced hitches, setting up a security system, and even warning my neighbors I'd be away. But as my headlights cut across the familiar shapes of my street, something was wrong. A cluster of shadows flickered by the RV, and the sound of a shrill voice sliced through the air. It was Karen. She was the kind of neighbor who carried herself like a queen with a cheap crown, a self-appointed ruler of the HOA. She was obese, proud, and ruthless, strutting through the cul-de-sac in flowing robes and oversized sunglasses like she was untouchable. She had fined families for leaving bikes on the lawn, threatened veterans for flying flags, and tormented kids for chalk drawings. But now she stood with a phone pressed to her ear, pacing in the glow of a street lamp, shouting at dispatch. "Yes, officer. I need someone immediately. There's a strange vehicle here, probably stolen, probably full of squatters. It's a hazard to our community." Her words oozed with false authority, her eyes darting to my RV as if she were preparing to claim it as her own. I killed my engine and stepped out, boots heavy on the ground, and her head whipped around. Her face, once twisted with righteous fury, froze in an expression I'll never forget: wide eyes, mouth half open, like someone who had just seen a ghost. Because through the tinted glass of my RV's window, a light flicked on. And there, standing tall inside, was my cousin Daniela's decorated marine home early from deployment. A man Karen had once mocked at a neighborhood meeting, calling him a paranoid soldier with too many toys. His presence in my RV was no accident. He had returned before me, and I had given him permission to stay there until I got back. And now Karen's fabricated story about squatters was unraveling in real time. Karen's phone slipped slightly in her grip. She tried to recover, shouting louder into the receiver. "There's a dangerous man inside. I think he broke in. He's armed, send backup." Her words were frantic, desperate, but the panic in her eyes betrayed the performance. Daniel stepped down from the RV with calm, unshakable composure, his military ID clipped to his vest, his voice steady and commanding. "I didn't break in. This RV belongs to my family. I'm here legally, and you've just filed a false police report." The weight of his tone made Karen's knees wobble. She tried to bluster. "Don't you dare talk to me like that, I run this neighborhood." But her voice cracked, and the neighbors who had gathered on porches began whispering among themselves. I joined Daniel, pulling my phone out to record, shining my flashlight on Karen's trembling hands and the padlock she had clearly tampered with. "You tried to call the cops to cover your theft, Karen," I said, each word deliberate. "But you didn't count on me returning early. And you definitely didn't count on who was inside." Her face turned a sickly shade of red, sweat gathering on her forehead as sirens began to approach in the distance. She dropped the phone into her robe pocket, muttering, "This is all a misunderstanding. I was just protecting the neighborhood." But her lie was too thin, and the truth was too thick to escape. Daniel wasn't finished. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear, though my camera caught every word. "You've harassed this community long enough. You've humiliated veterans, bullied kids, and spread fear. Tonight, you called in a false threat against me. That's not just petty, that's a crime." Karen staggered backward, her slippers scraping on the pavement, her once proud posture collapsing into a pathetic hunch. She opened her mouth to retort, But headlights washed over us, and two police cruisers pulled up. Officers stepped out, hands resting cautiously near their holsters, eyes sweeping the scene. Karen rushed toward them, her voice high and frantic. "Officers, arrest them. They're trespassing. They're criminals." But before she could spin her web, Daniel presented his ID, his voice clipped and formal. "Staff Sergeant Daniel Ortiz, United States Marine Corps. I am lawfully present in this RV, which is family property." This woman attempted to tamper with the locks and called in a false emergency report claiming I was an intruder. He handed over documents I had already given him: title, registration, proof of ownership. The officers exchanged glances, their faces shifting from tension to clarity as they looked from me to Karen. And then, like the universe itself had a sense of humor, another twist fell into place. Officer Reynolds, the senior on duty, recognized Daniel immediately. "Sergeant Ortiz, I met you at the Veterans Hall last year. You were honored for service in Kabul." His respect was palpable, his handshake firm. He turned to Karen, who was shaking like a cornered animal, and said flatly, "Ma'am, we need to talk about your misuse of emergency services and your attempt to tamper with private property." The air around us seemed to crackle with vindication. The neighbors murmured louder, some even clapping softly from the shadows. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on land. She tried again. No, you don't understand. I was just trying to help," but her words had no weight. Her power was evaporating under the harsh white light of squad car beams, under the clear truth of documents and recordings, under the silent strength of a Marine who stood unshaken. That was the moment I knew Karen had lost. The queen of petty fines and hollow threats was nothing but a fraud with a phone. And now her empire of intimidation was collapsing in front of everyone. But I also knew this was just the beginning. The real reckoning of public downfall. The courtroom confrontation. The final stripping away of her arrogance was still to come. And for once, it wasn't just about protecting my RV. It was about showing her, and everyone else, that justice had a way of arriving when you least expected it. The squad cars idled on the curb with their lights painting the night red and blue, a surreal glow washing over the neighborhood that had grown too used to Karen's tyranny. This time, though, there was no hiding behind letters, fines, or whispered threats. She was standing in the open, her robe clinging to her damp skin, her hands shaking while the officers examined the tampered padlock and the scratches on the RV door. When the cuffs came out, Karen shrieked like an animal being dragged to slaughter. "This is harassment. You're all conspiring against me. I'm the only one protecting this place." The neighbors watched from their porches, and the longer she wailed, the more laughter and gasps rippled through the crowd. For once, her intimidation had no bite. Her words sounded pathetic, desperate, stripped of the power she thought she wielded. The officers read her rights as she kicked and screamed, the sound of metal on wrists echoing like a final judgment. At the station, Karen tried to claw her way out of trouble with the same arrogance she always leaned on. She demanded to speak to the head of the department, claiming her HOA position made her practically government. She invented new lies, insisting that Daniel had broken into the RV, that she was only protecting community property, that the scratches on the padlock were old damage. But the truth was already nailed down tight. My video recording showed her pacing with the crowbar. The 911 transcript captured her false claim of squatters. Daniel's military ID and my property documents erased her story before it even began. Then came the twist she never expected. A county investigator walked into the interview room carrying a thick file of complaints. He had been building a case for months against fraudulent HOAs that extorted residents with fabricated fines. Karen's name was highlighted again and again. Letters she had signed using the old president's name. Bank statements showing thousands of dollars of fees funneled into a private account. Neighbors' sworn statements about threats and intimidation. The investigator looked her dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, you're not just facing misdemeanor charges tonight. You're looking at fraud, forgery, and racketeering." Her mouth fell open, but no words came out. For the first time, she was silent, her eyes darting as if she could find an escape in the sterile walls of the interrogation room. But there was none. The very power she had built her little empire on was turning into the evidence that would crush her. In court weeks later, the gallery was full. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now sat tall, waiting to see justice. The judge read the charges, his voice steady, and Karen looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, swallowed in an ill-fitting blazer. Her arrogance crumbled into a pale, trembling shell. Her lawyer tried to spin her as a dedicated community volunteer misunderstood by angry residents. But one by one, people stood to testify. Mr. Lewis, the elderly gardener she fined for wildflowers, raised his trembling hand and said, "She told me if I didn't pay, she'd have me evicted. That garden was my late wife's legacy." A single mother described how Karen harassed her children for chalk drawings. A veteran recounted being forced to take down his flag. And Daniel told the story of the night she called 911 on him, calling a Marine a criminal. Each testimony was a nail sealing her fate. Karen snapped mid-trial, standing up and pointing at the crowd. "You all needed me. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart." The judge slammed his gavel, silencing her. "Ms. Karen, what you've done is not protection, it is exploitation. You abused your neighbors, manipulated authority, and tried to cover your theft with lies. This court finds you guilty on all counts." The sentence was read aloud: jail time, restitution, and a permanent ban from holding any HOA or community office. Her scream echoed one last time, but it carried no power, only emptiness. The bailiff led her away, and the door closed behind her like the end of an era. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. The HOA dissolved, replaced with a council run by volunteers who valued fairness over control. Families painted mailboxes bright colors. Children filled sidewalks with chalk art. Flags flew freely, and laughter returned to streets once silenced by fear. My RV sat proudly in the yard. Not just a vehicle anymore, but a symbol of what we had reclaimed. Daniel became a local hero, invited to speak at community events about resilience and courage. Emily, who had uncovered the paper trail of fraud, started volunteering her legal knowledge to help other neighborhoods fight back against abusive HOAs. And as for me, I stood on my porch one evening, the sun dipping low, the sound of neighbors sharing food and music drifting through the air. For the first time in years, the street felt alive, free, ours. Karen's downfall had been bitter and loud. But what came after was soft, healing, and full of hope. So I'll leave you with this. Was Karen ever right to claim she was protecting the community? Or was she nothing more than a tyrant clinging to false power? Share what you believe, because every neighborhood faces a choice between fear and freedom. And it's up to all of us to decide which one we'll defend.